How have you been? How you doing?
Pretty good. Actually, all things considered, I've been busy.
Yeah,
I have a little bit of time off in between some shooting schedules right now, so enjoying it.
I love that you've been keeping the fashion alive in quarantine. Somebody had to.
Hey, now it has been difficult for sure. But yeah, I feel like there's always a fashion moment happening in this house, whether or not the cameras are on.
Yeah, good for you. I wish I had the same ambition you did to actually properly put on clothes during the
Hey,
pandemic. So,
those glasses are doing it though.
thanks.
You got the accessories going, so we're good.
Hey, if you say so, I'll take it.
Yeah.
Congratulations on all 7 seasons of Younger. We've reached the end. The pandemic doesn't exist in the world of Younger, even though it was shot during it. If the pandemic would have happened in the show, what would Josh be doing? How would he have handled?
Well, tattooing would have been off the books, right? At least legally. I think he may have been tattooing himself. And potentially Kelsey and Lauren, who, would all be in Josh's pod. I think Josh would be reading a lot. And Josh is a parent. So him and Claire would probably potentially be living together with Gemma during the pandemic. Who knows? I mean, if there's a pandemic, do they get back together if they're spending all that time? Does it blow up? And does she move back to Ireland? I don't know. Does Josh go back down to West Virginia to spend time with his family?
Basically, it would have been a completely different season.
Totally different show. Yeah, it would have been great.
After playing Josh for 7 seasons, do you have a different kind of interpretation or appreciation or perspective on straight bro culture and the guys who inhabit that space?
Great question. I think that in terms of the medium of filmmaking in general, I think that everyone, there's a responsibility to write characters that are more than the stereotype. And I think that Darren has always done a really good job of that. But I think the way Josh came to life on this show, in terms of his emotionality and his heart and his openness, I think that on paper, Josh is a straight bro, right? But he's so much more than that. And it has been such an honor to bring that character to life, right? Just to see Josh cry, right? We need to see more men cry. We all do, right? But I'm excited for the future of masculinity in general, right? But the ways in which art can expand that notion and just the collapsing of binaries and divisions that exist in everything, right?
Do you have any real examples of that and Josh's influences on culture when it comes to breaking down these masculine norms or these tropes?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the normal, quote unquote, the normal fan of this show is a woman my age, right? Or a bit older. And I've had people come up to me, specifically men, who will say, "Oh man, my girlfriend watched the show and I started watching it because it was on," because they can't admit that they started watching the show without them, right? But they found truth in this character and these storylines. And that's just a chip away at the work that is being done and needs to be done,
Yeah. So how do you reflect when you look back at these 7 seasons and auditioning before the show started and now are 7 years later? A lot of time has gone by. You've done a lot in between the beginning and the end. How has Younger changed your career?
Oh man, it opened so many doors for me. both in like the literal sense of my career. It allowed me to tap into other projects in film and television, but also in publishing. You know, I think I got like a taste of the publishing world, and it was something that I had always imagined doing, but never really understood how to get there. And I got just like a basic education of how the publishing world operates. And I was able to write a couple books, and I have a third one on the way. And also just in a spiritual sense, at its core, Younger is optimistic. And these have been some trying years, you know? I mean, think about everything that we've lived through politically and socially over the last 7 years, and how much the world has changed. And having this foundation of Younger, this summer camp that I got to go to every year, pretty much on the dot for 3 months, 4 months. There was just this reminder of hope that was instilled because of this show. And I think it's so important that we have those outlets. Whether or not you work in the industry, you can turn your television on and find something that brings you happy. It's not even just the television, but how important it is to seek joy. Younger's really brought that to life for me.
Yeah, that's so. I'm glad you said that, because that is one thing that I have had to latch onto in the last year, is to rebuild my resiliency bank.
Totally.
Sometimes force myself to actually find those things that make me happy. Sounds like you've been doing the same.
For sure. Yeah, so important.
I imagine Younger has sort of also kept you kind of locked up schedule-wise. Maybe it's been difficult to take on other projects because you've been working on that show for 7 years. So now that you've got some extra time, what does that mean for the future of your career?
That's a great question. I mean, I'm on another show right now. I'm on The Walking Dead. So we'll see what happens in that universe. But I am really excited about this next phase of my career. I want to, it's interesting going from half-hour comedy to hour-long action-based drama, right? That transition was and has been intense both times. But I don't know exactly what I want to do next. I think I'm luckily in this position where I get to make that decision instead of having that decision made for me. And I know for sure I want to be more involved creatively from a production standpoint. I want to be in a writer's room. I want to direct. I am in love with this medium of art, and I want to give myself more to it. On a show or film, probably a show, because everyone's making television now, that is driving the message that I carry with me everywhere in my life, you know?
Yeah, and as you're doing on Walking Dead, I imagine some of that will be breaking down some of these gender norms and pushing queer stories,
Totally,
narratives into some of these shows, which you've been doing now. It's Felix on Walking Dead,
for sure,
which is so great. What's been the most gratifying part of bringing a queer superhero to life?
Yeah. I mean, we need more queer superheroes, you know? This is just like the tip of the iceberg. And I think it kind of goes back to what we were talking about earlier. It's like flipping these stereotypes on their heads, you know? There are so many ways in which Felix could have been written or could have been played. And there's like a brute masculine force to Felix that is opposite potentially of what we would come to expect from a queer superhero. then underneath that is this just fucking raw emotionality and heart. And I think that like in the future moving forward for superheroes or really just any queer character on television and film, like I'm excited for a future where we don't rely on the violence that queer people experience in order to tell their stories. I want to just see queer people go to the grocery store, you know, like I just want to see them live their lives in ways that other characters have been written, you know, and that goes beyond queer characters. It's really everyone deserves that space. You know, I watch a show like Rami, and that's like the first time we've seen a Muslim character like really come to life in television, or a family for that matter. Like think about everyone else and every other story that's worthy of voice and time. There's so much more that we can be doing. And I think we're getting there, but we still have a lot of work to do.
Yeah. As Pride approaches, I want to take a moment to reflect on the fact that you've been on this odyssey in regards to your sexuality since we spoke in 2017.
Yeah.
We spoke and you said, when we spoke then, you said it was like a love bomb exchange, and this was over the phone. So this is a little different. But in thinking about that and going back to that interview, I was curious, how do you feel in your skin now versus when you first came out 5 years ago in 20?
Yeah. I feel quite settled in my skin in a way that doesn't feel tired. The word settled kind of has a weight to it. I'm not complicit in it, but I feel really comfortable with the person that I am. And, you know, even just being off social media for the last few months, like I'm currently living through this ego death of sorts. And so much of my public persona and character in the last few years have been driven by this voice and this message. And to let that go in a public space has been really interesting. Not that I have let it go forever, but even just in the last few months, I have focused on myself and what it means to me rather than the access to other people and the share, right? And I think this year has been really difficult and introspective just in terms of queer identity in general, you know, like how much of our queer identities are actually tied to the relationships that we have with other people, what we have or we don't have with other people. You know, I have been living in a house with my partner for the last year plus, and there have been no external relationships, no secondary partners, no tertiary partners, nothing. And I'm kind of always living in this queer spiral, but like, what does the definition of queer, how does the definition of queer change when we don't have access to other, you know? What this year really has done for me, and this is just an extension of this queer spiral that I have constantly been living in, but is our ability to see queerness in everything that exists rather than just our gender or sexuality, you know? Yeah. I mean, going back to going to the grocery store, like, what is queer about going to the grocery store, you know? Like, specifically in a conservative neighborhood that I live in, upstate New York, you know, how can I bring that with me? And what does that mean in the larger environment that I live in? It's been beautiful, honestly, but, you know, difficult at times.
Yeah. Well, I've always appreciated that you have been frank about your sexuality, open in all regards. And I think that when it comes to walking inside of a grocery store, it's like queerness is an extension of just who you are sometimes. Like sometimes that's the statement. So I appreciate that about you.
Thanks.
Yeah.
I appreciate this this dialogue. It's, you know, even just having queer conversation over this last year has been limited, and it's refreshing to get on a call with someone who gets it. So thank you.
Yeah. Super happy to have this conversation. Yeah. They're giving me the wrap. So this was great. And we'll have more of these conversations, and we'll check in at some point.
Forever.
You're going to do forever and ever, because you're going to do some amazing stuff in the future.
Thanks, Chris. I appreciate you.
Yeah, I appreciate you too. Take care. Bye, Nico.